Gunnar stood at the head of the war room table, his single blue eye scanning the assembled faces. The weight of what had just transpired with Sophia still hung heavy on his shoulders, but he wasn't about to let that show. Not here. Not now. The room was packed. The pack. The remnants of Echo Division. Rose's crew. Even the elves stood along the edges, arms crossed, silent sentinels to a discussion that would shape everything moving forward. The tension was thick. Everyone knew something had gone down. Gunnar exhaled through his nose, gripping the edge of the table. "We're no longer part of Echo Division." Dead silence. The statement hit like a gunshot. He let it sink in. Let them process it. Then he laid it out, blunt and sharp. Homeland Security is moving in. Echo Division is now under their control. Sophia gave me the order straight from the top. POTUS himself. Reagan is taking command. This facility belongs to Homeland now. A sharp scoff from Bianca. Just like that? Just like that. Bianca shook her head, arms crossed, tension coiling in her frame. "You've got to be freaking kidding me." Gunnar's gaze snapped to her, sharp as a blade. "Do I look like I'm kidding?" The room stayed silent. Then Darren, leaning against the far wall, arms crossed, spoke up. "So what about us? Where does that leave the pack?" Gunnar's grip tightened on the table, but his voice was steady. "We're out. Completely independent. The pack will operate from the workshop. Echo Division and Homeland run the facility, but we don't answer to them. We'll work with them when needed. But we stand alone." The words were final. There was no room for argument. But that didn't mean the questions stopped. "Right. Great. Love that for us," Darren drawled, pushing off the wall. "So, just to clarify, I don't take orders from Reagan, but I also don't technically count as pack. Which means I'm just here." Gunnar exhaled slowly. "You're not pack, but you've got the pack's respect." Darren nodded, considering that. "Good enough for me." He leaned back against the wall again, content with the answer. But Shade? Shade didn't move. His gaze flicked toward Katrina. "And me?" Katrina turned her head slightly, her voice even. "You stand with me. Like always." Shade gave a sharp nod. No hesitation. That was settled. Bianca, still fuming, wasn't done. "So what happens when the next attack comes? You think Homeland's gonna have our backs?" Desera, ever the strategist, leaned forward. "Are we even keeping shared comms? Or is this a full break?" Gunnar sighed. "We're not enemies. We're still allies. But the pack moves on our own terms. We keep comms. The pack doesn't answer to Echo, but if we need backup, we'll have it. Same goes for Echo. If shit hits the fan, they'll call. We pick up." It wasn't perfect, but it was better than nothing. From the back of the room, Rose was silent, watching, until she wasn't. Yeah, that's all great," she said, stepping forward. "But I want to know when I'm getting access to a damn portal." Gunnar turned his attention to her, his expression hardening. "You know the answer." Her jaw clenched. "I know the answer I don't like," she shot back. She needed into Draven's network. She needed to find where he had taken Argoz. And that meant access to a portal. "I'm talking to Aliana," Gunnar said, "but I'm not risking our only stable portal for something half-baked." Rose scoffed, anger flickering behind her eyes. "Half-baked? This is our shot at taking him down from the inside. I don't need a lecture, I need an access point." Gunnar's stare was unyielding. "You'll get it when I say it's time, not before." Rose's hands curled into fists at her sides. Bianca glanced at Desera, muttering, "Oh, here we go." But before Rose could fire back, Clora's voice cut through the tension. "We will discuss this soon," she said. That settled it. For now. "That's it. We're done here. You all know where you stand. Get to work." One by one, they filed out. Some with questions still lingering on their tongues. Some with anger burning just beneath the surface. Some with resignation in their eyes. The war room was emptying, but Rose wasn't moving. She stood near the entrance, arms crossed so tight it looked like she was physically holding herself back. Her anger was palpable, simmering just beneath the surface, waiting for an outlet. Gunnar didn't look up right away. He didn't need to. He could feel it, the tension in the air, the heat rolling off her in waves. Finally he exhaled, slow and measured. "You're pissed." A sharp laugh escaped Rose's lips, low and humourless. "Pissed? No, Gunnar. Pissed was 10 minutes ago. Now, I'm fucking livid." She started toward him, boots hitting the floor hard. "You're making a mistake." Gunnar finally met her gaze, expression unreadable. "I don't make mistakes." Rose's scoff was sharp. "Oh, bullshit. You don't trust me enough to give me access to a portal, but you're willing to sit here twiddling your damn thumbs while Draven plays puppet master." His eye narrowed. "I trust you. I don't trust your emotions right now." Wrong move. Rose's temper flared, her fists clenching at her sides as her magic crackled along her knuckles. "You don't trust my emotions," she seethed. "That's rich, coming from the guy who threw a damn desk across a room yesterday." Gunnar's jaw locked. "I will get you a portal, on my terms, not yours." Rose stepped in closer, too close, her presence electric. "Then you better do it fast, because if you think I'm just going to sit around waiting while Argoz is out there—" She snapped. Her fist slammed into the nearest object, one of Eli's newly repaired monitors. The screen exploded in a shower of sparks, the glass cracking beneath her knuckles. Gunnar didn't even flinch. Instead, he exhaled, slow and controlled. "Feel better?" Rose flexed her hand, barely containing her fury. "A little." Gunnar nodded once. "Good. Now get the hell out of my war room." She stormed out, footsteps echoing like gunfire. Near the doorway, Eliana stood silently. She had arrived just in time to witness the final moments, the shattered monitor, the fire in Rose's eyes, the exhaustion in Gunnar's. She did not speak right away. She waited. She watched as Darren, lounging casually outside, raised an eyebrow as Rose stormed past him. "Damn! 1 monitor. Could have been 2. I give it a 7 out of 10. Rose flipped him off without breaking stride. Darren grinned, then turned back toward the war room. "So, Cap," he drawled, stepping inside. "Just checking, when exactly do we start investing in destruction-proof furniture?" Gunnar just stared at him. Darren lifted his hands, backing up. All right. I'll leave you to your brooding." He was gone before he could get thrown out. Only then did Eliana step forward, her presence calm but heavy. She moved past the broken monitor, past the lingering heat in the air from Rose's fire magic. Gunnar exhaled through his nose, rubbing his temples. "If you're here to tell me I handled that poorly, save it." "No," Eliana said softly. "I am here to ask if you are all right." He let out a sharp breath, half laugh, half frustration. "Do I look all right?" Her gaze didn't waver. "No," she admitted. "You look like a man who is trying to hold too many burdens alone." Gunnar ran a hand down his face, exhaustion seeping into his movements. "Someone's got to... And yet you are not alone." She let the words linger between them. For a moment, Gunnar said nothing. He just stood there, surrounded by the wreckage of another day, another fight, another battle he couldn't afford to lose. Finally, he met her gaze. "What did you need, Eliana?" She didn't answer right away. Because right now? She wasn't entirely sure if he was asking her, or if he was finally admitting that he needed help. He exhaled slowly, running a hand down his face. She didn't speak immediately, just watching him, her piercing blue eyes unreadable. He let out a sharp breath, shaking his head. "I assume you have thoughts." "I always have thoughts, Gunnar," she said evenly. "But first, I have a question." He raised a brow but said nothing. "Did you do this because you believe it was the right call?" she asked. "Or because you're tired of being ordered around?" His eye snapped to hers. That was a low hit, and she knew it. "What does it matter?" he muttered. It matters because I need to know if the man I trust is making decisions based on strategy or anger. The words hung between them. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Gunnar exhaled, tilting his head back slightly. It was the right call. Eliana didn't look convinced, but she didn't push. The High Council won't approve of this, she warned. Do I look like I care? You should, he scoffed, shaking his head. If they pull out, then they pull out. She studied him, her gaze sharp. Then, finally, she sighed. Number they won't, because I won't let them. His gaze flicked back to hers, surprised. For the first time in her long life, Eliana had made a choice based on what she believed was right, not what she was told to do. And now she had to own it. Alfheim will not serve Homeland Security, she stated. I know. But we will serve you. The words held weight. Gunnar nodded once. Then let's make sure everyone else is on the same page. The war room was filled. Sophia sat across from Gunnar, arms crossed, her sharp gaze locked onto him. Reagan was beside her, looking equally unimpressed. Eliana took her seat beside Gunnar, her posture straight and unreadable. Darren slouched at the edge of the table, arms folded, eyes flicking between the power players like he was watching a match about to explode. Clora sat next to Gunnar, silent but alert. The wolves were in the room too. Omega sat beside Clora's chair, ears perked, eyes sharp. Alpha lounged at Gunnar's feet, watching everything. Beta was positioned near the door, silent but alert. Sophia exhaled. All right, Gunnar. You wanted this meeting. Talk. He leaned forward, placing both hands on the table. The pack is out of Echo Division. Alfheim will not work under Homeland, but we are still in this war. And if Echo Division wants to be properly armed, you're going to have to work with us. Sophia leaned back, unimpressed. I knew you were going to pull this shit. Reagan frowned. You're saying Echo has to buy its weapons from you now? You need enchanted weapons. The pack makes them. Alfheim forges them. You want them. You pay for them. That's how this works. Sophia's jaw tensed. And if we say no? Eliana spoke before Gunnar could. Then Alfheim leaves. The words hit like a hammer. Silence stretched across the table. Reagan shifted uncomfortably, glancing between them. Sophia's lips pressed into a thin line. She knew when she was being backed into a corner. Fine, she muttered. But I want oversight. Someone from Echo Division needs direct access to your operation. Gunnar's expression darkened. Not happening? We need someone on the inside, Gunnar. You have one. The room shifted slightly as all eyes turned to Clora. Clora hadn't moved. Reagan frowned slightly. With all due respect. That's where it all went wrong. She's not a trained warrior. The room went still. Omega's ears flicked, his eyes darkened. A deep, warning growl built in his chest. Clora froze. Then, slowly, her breathing changed. Her pupils dilated. Her heart slowed. Blood rage. Her voice was quiet but dangerous. Not a warrior? She stood abruptly. The chair scraped against the floor. Omega rose with her, his muscles coiled, his stance low. But his movements were not his own. They were Clora's. For the first time since the merge, they were slipping again. Reagan's expression shifted, from frustration to unease. Darren, who had been slouching, suddenly sat up. A gun? Gunnar knew immediately. This was bad. He stood, slow and careful. Alpha moved with him. Clora. His voice was low, commanding. Stand! Down! Omega growled, but stopped. Clora's fists clenched, shaking. Her entire body was tense, barely controlled. She wasn't fully merging, but she was damn close. For a long, breathless moment, no one moved. Finally. Clora exhaled sharply and sat down. Omega followed. Sophia cleared her throat. Right. South. That happened. Darren, ever the idiot, muttered, "Well, that went well." No one laughed. Reagan exhaled, choosing her next words carefully. "I meant no disrespect," she said evenly. Clora didn't look at her. She was still breathing heavily. Gunnar took note of everything. She wasn't okay. She hadn't processed the merge, and it was eating her alive. He needed to talk to her, soon. The room was thick with tension. Clora had settled back into her chair, but the energy around her hadn't faded. The wolves still watched. Omega's ears flicked at every slight movement. Alpha sat alert beside Gunnar, tail flicking, eyes sharp. Sophia, ever the hardened agent, rubbed her temples, clearly over this conversation. "Fine." Her voice was tight. "Clora represents Alfheim. Echo will get its weapons. Homeland will provide land." She paused. "But I'm not signing off on a blank check, Gunnar. I need more than just promises." That was the moment everything shifted. Gunnar leaned forward, placing both hands on the table. His voice was low, steady, and absolute. "You don't have a choice, Sophia?" Her eyes flicked up to his, a challenge burning there. "Oh, I always have a choice." Eliana's voice cut through the tension like steel. "So does the pack." All eyes turned to her. She didn't flinch. "If Homeland isn't willing to meet us in the middle, then the pack can simply relocate to Alfheim. There they will be safe. There they will be supplied. And there they will have allies who won't hesitate to act when the time comes." Silence. Sophia's jaw clenched. She knew Eliana wasn't bluffing. If the pack left Earth entirely, that meant no enchanted weapons, no 11 forces, no supernatural firepower for Echo Division. Sophia was cornered. Again. Darren, who had been sitting with his arms folded, finally uncrossed them. All right. Let's stop measuring whose kingdom is bigger and talk solutions." Gunnar shot him a look, but Darren ignored it. He turned towards Sophia, leaning back in his chair like this wasn't a powder keg about to explode. "Look, Echo needs resources. The pack needs space. Homeland has land. The pack has the weapons. It's a trade, plain and simple." Sophia exhaled sharply, rubbing her temples. "And what does this trade look like exactly?" Gunnar laid it out. "Echo Division will receive weapons and ammunition, but instead of paying in money, Homeland will provide resources, materials, logistics, intelligence. Homeland will provide 500 acres for the pack's base of operations. Alfheim forces will remain on Earth, but will not be under Homeland's command. They will answer to Gunnar and Clora. Echo Division gets access to enchanted gear, but must work through Gunnar for distribution." Sophia exhaled. "That's not a small ask." Darren shrugged. "Neither is asking Gunnar to trust the US government again." Sophia tapped her fingers against the table. She knew she had no choice. "Fine," she muttered. "But if I'm giving up 500 acres of federal land, then I'm sending my engineers to build on it." That caught Gunnar's attention. "You want to send Homeland Security into pack territory?" "Not Homeland. Army Corps of Engineers." Sophia exhaled. Gunnar studied her carefully. He didn't like working with the military, but he wasn't an idiot. They needed the support. Gunnar's voice was firm. "The land is ours. Your engineers get in, build, and get out. They don't stay. They don't interfere. And Echo Division gets access to our weapons, but only through me." Sophia sighed. "Agreed." Eliana folded her arms. "Then it's settled." Sophia met Gunnar's eye, her gaze sharp. "This is the last time you get to dictate terms to me." Gunnar didn't smile. "We'll see." The war room had finally cleared out. Sophia and Reagan had left. Eliana had lingered only a moment longer before giving Gunnar a knowing look and departing. The wolves were gone except Alpha, who sat beside Gunnar's chair, his piercing blue eyes watching him. Darren, arms folded, leaned against the table, watching Gunnar process everything. "You gonna sit there brooding all day, or are we actually gonna talk about this circus you just built?" Gunnar exhaled, shaking his head. "You're taking point on the engineers?" Darren's brows lifted. "Oh, hell no. The last time I dealt with a bunch of uniformed bureaucrats, I retired. Gunnar wasn't amused. You know how the army works, Sergeant Major. You know how these guys operate. I need someone who won't let them screw us over. Darren let out a sharp laugh. So you're telling me I gotta play babysitter for a bunch of base builders? Gunnar's expression darkened. No, I'm telling you to make sure they do it right. They're setting up a base X, where the fighting happened in front of the workshop. That land is ours now, and I want it fortified. That means command structures, supply zones, vehicle maintenance, and defences. Darren ran a hand through his hair, considering. All right, let me get this straight. You want me to take charge of an entire engineer battalion, make sure they don't screw us over, and build a fully functional forward operating base in Pact territory, without pissing anyone off? Gunnar just stared at him. Darren sighed. Right. Should have led with that. Consider it done. The night air was cool, the scent of damp earth and pine hanging heavy in the air as Gunnar stepped out of the workshop. His cybernetic fingers flexed at his side, tension still rolling through his body. The meeting had been a battlefield of words, but that wasn't what was weighing on him now. He had seen it, the moment her control slipped. The blood rage, the overwhelming instinct to destroy. He knew that feeling all too well. He had lived it, and he hadn't done a damn thing to help her. With a slow breath, he started toward the tree line. The night air was cool, the scent of damp earth and pine hanging heavy in the air as Gunnar stepped out of the workshop. His cybernetic fingers flexed at his side, tension still rolling through his body. The meeting had been a battlefield of words, but that wasn't what was weighing on him now. It was Clora. He had seen it, the moment her control slipped. The blood rage, the overwhelming instinct to destroy. He knew that feeling all too well. He had lived it, and he hadn't done a damn thing to help her. That sat heavy on him now. With a slow breath, he started toward the tree line. He stopped a few feet from Clora. Mind if I sit? She didn't answer right away. Then, slowly, she nodded. He lowered himself onto the log beside her, resting his arms on his knees. For a long moment, they just sat in silence. Omega let out a low breath, shifting slightly against Clora's leg. She reached down, running her fingers through his fur, but Gunnar could see the tension in her shoulders. She was still wound tight. I saw what happened in the meeting, he said finally. It was nothing, she muttered. Gunnar huffed a quiet laugh. Bullshit. Her jaw clenched. I had it under control. Did you? Clora's fingers tightened in Omega's fur. She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. She didn't have an answer. Gunnar leaned forward slightly. I know what it's like, Clora. That made her glance at him. The rage, he continued, voice low. The way it takes over, the way it makes you feel unstoppable, the way it makes you feel like you have to keep going because if you stop, you'll break. Because he was right, because he understood. I had control, she said, but it was weaker now. Gunnar shook his head. You barely did. And next time, it might not be there at all. Her breathing was steady, but her pulse in her neck told a different story. It was the first time, she muttered. I wasn't ready. He nodded. Neither was I. That caught her off guard. The first time I merged with Alpha, Gunnar said, looking straight ahead. It almost destroyed me. Clora didn't say anything. She just listened. I thought I could control it. I thought I was strong enough. But I didn't know what I was dealing with. His fingers flexed slightly. The instincts were stronger than mine. The rage was stronger than mine, and I nearly lost myself to it. Clora exhaled slowly. How did you stop? Gunnar turned his head toward her. I didn't. Her breath hitched slightly. Alpha did. Clora's gaze dropped to Omega. The massive wolf lay beside her, watching Gunnar with knowing eyes. They balance us, Gunnar said, nodding toward Omega. That's the only reason I came back from it, and the only reason you did, too. Clora exhaled sharply, looking away. I don't want to lose myself to it, she admitted. Her voice was quieter now. Gunner's voice was firm. Then you have to own it. You have to train with it. You have to understand it, because next time you won't have the luxury of learning in the moment. Clora swallowed hard, but she nodded. She knew he was right. Omega shifted, pressing his head against her leg again. She reached down, running her fingers through his fur. Gunner stood, exhaling. "You'll be all right, Clora." His voice was quieter now, but steady. "You're one of us, and we don't lose our own." She glanced up at him, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she nodded. This wasn't over, but it was a start. The tension had finally settled, though not completely. It was a start. He gave her a final nod, then turned toward Eliana, who had been standing nearby the entire time. She had let him handle it, let them handle it, but he could tell she had thoughts. She always did. Gunner exhaled, rolling his shoulders. "I need you to arrange a meeting with the High Council." Gunner gave a humorless chuckle. "Oh, I'd rather slam my head into a wall. But it needs to happen." Gunner flexed his cybernetic fingers, letting the cool air settle his thoughts. Because Echo Division has a new commander now, and if Alfheim is going to stay in this fight, they need to know who they're dealing with. Reagan needs to be introduced to them, along with Sophia. Eliana's expression shifted slightly, thoughtful now. "You want them to see that Homeland is stepping in more aggressively." Gunner nodded. "They need to understand the stakes. And if they're going to keep supporting us, they need to trust the people running this operation." Eliana exhaled, gaze shifting toward the tree line. "Then the question is, where do we meet them? Do we invite the council to Earth? Or do we take Sophia and Reagan to Alfheim?" Gunner rubbed his jaw, considering. Both had risks. If they took Sophia and Reagan to Alfheim, it would be a power move, showing the council that Earth wasn't just some defenseless realm waiting to be overrun. He let out a slow breath. "Alfheim." Eliana nodded slightly, as if she had already expected that answer. "I'll arrange it." Gunner met her gaze. "Soon, Eliana? This can't wait." Eliana studied him for a long moment. She saw what was really going on. This wasn't just about diplomacy. This was about control. About making sure Alfheim understood that Earth wasn't going to be left hanging the next time a war came to its doorstep. Finally, she inclined her head. "I'll make the call." Gunner gave a single nod, then turned back toward the workshop. Alpha fell into step beside him, the weight of everything settling onto his shoulders again. The war wasn't over. It was just getting started. The fire in the makeshift safe house crackled softly, the warmth barely reaching where Lyra leaned against the wall, her legs stretched out in front of her. The rifle sat within reach, its worn barrel catching the dim light, but for once she wasn't gripping it like a lifeline. Argoz sat across from her, still rolling the shackles in her hands. She hadn't spoken much since they settled in, but Lyra could see it in her eyes, the gears turning, the weight pressing down. The silence stretched, not awkward but thick. Lyra sighed, stretching out her arms. "All right, out with it." Argoz blinked, glancing up. "Out with what?" "You've been chewing on something ever since I asked about Rose. Let's hear it." Argoz hesitated, eyes flicking to the fire. Her hands tightened around the metal cuffs, and for a moment, Lyra thought she wasn't going to answer. Then quietly, "She cried." Lyra blinked. Argoz didn't look at her, her voice flat, like she was stating a fact rather than something significant. "Katrina told her everything after the fight, told her what happened. Rose didn't believe it at first, but when Katrina gave her your fire dagger, she broke." Lyra's smirk faded. Argoz exhaled, rolling the shackles in her fingers. "I didn't think she had it in her. Thought she'd shrug it off, drink it away, maybe throw a sarcastic one-liner and move on." Lyra leaned her head back against the stone wall, staring at the ceiling. "Yeah, me too." Silence again. The fire popped, and Lyra reached for one of the dried ration packs, tearing it open with her teeth. She took a bite, chewed slowly. Guess that makes things complicated, she muttered. Argoz snorted. That's one way to put it. Lyra smirked again, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. She'd expected a lot of reactions to her death: relief, indifference, maybe even the occasional good riddance. But not this. Not the idea that her absence had actually meant something to someone. It left a sour taste in her mouth, one she didn't know how to get rid of. Argoz finally tossed the shackles aside, stretching out on the cot with a groan. I don't know what you're planning next, but if it involves me getting shot at again, I swear to the gods. It definitely involves you getting shot at again, Lyra cut in smoothly. Argoz groaned louder, covering her face with her arm. I hate you. Lyra's grin returned. Now that I believe... She leaned back against the wall, her smirk settling into something softer, something unreadable. Outside, the Mirkdust winds howled through the ruins, the sound distant but constant. The world was still burning, Draven was still out there, and the war was far from over. But for now, they had a roof over their heads, a fire in front of them, and for the first time in a long time. A moment to breathe.